Right now, if you feel cold, you tap a button and the heat comes on. You pull on a jacket, you grab a hot drink, and the worst part of your day is a chilly walk to the car. So picture a knight in shining steel armor. Now make it the middle of January. Drop him in a field of frozen mud with a snowstorm blowing sideways and a battle about to begin. That gleaming armor is now a freezing metal shell strapped to his skin. So how did a man survive an entire battle dressed in cold steel? The answer is not toughness alone. It is wool, fat, fire, and one clever trick hiding under the armor. Let's start with the metal itself. Steel is one of the worst things you could possibly wear in the cold. Metal pulls heat out of your body far faster than air does. A bare steel plate left out in winter gets so cold it can stick to wet skin and tear it. So here is the first secret. No knight ever wore plate armor directly against his body. The steel you picture was only the outer shell. The real armor against the cold was hidden underneath. It started with a simple layer of linen against the skin. Then came the medieval miracle fabric, wool. Wool keeps you warm even when it is soaking wet, which is exactly what you need in a winter campaign. A knight wore woolen hose on his legs and woolen tunics on his body, but the most important layer had a special name, the gambeson. A gambeson was a thick jacket stuffed and quilted from many layers of linen and wool. Some had over 20 layers stitched together. It was padding and insulation at the same time. This quilted coat softened the blows of a mace and trapped a thick cushion of warm air around the body. Over the gambeson went a shirt of mail, and over that the steel plate. So the knight you imagine was basically wearing a heavy duvet, wrapped in a metal shell. The plate took the hits, and the padding underneath kept him alive. But there was one part of the body this could not fully save: the hands and the feet. Steel gauntlets and steel shoes called sabatons sat right against the fingers and toes. And the fingers and toes are exactly where frostbite strikes first. This was the real enemy on a winter campaign, far more than enemy swords. Chroniclers recorded soldiers losing fingers, toes, and even noses to the cold. So knights fought back with everything they had. They stuffed their boots with straw and raw wool for insulation. They wore thick mittens and lined their gloves with fur. And off the battlefield, they wrapped themselves in heavy woolen cloaks. The wealthy lined those cloaks with fur, an open sign of status and warmth at once. But the smartest defense against winter was to avoid it completely. For most of the Middle Ages, war had a season. Armies marched and fought in the warmer months, from spring to autumn. When the cold came, most campaigns simply stopped and everyone went home. It was about food as much as frost. In winter, there was no grass for the horses and little to forage for the men. So most knights spent the worst months indoors by a fire, not freezing in a field. But not all of them. Some knights chose to fight in the dead of winter on purpose. In the frozen north, the Teutonic knights ran winter campaigns called Reisen. They waited for the swamps and rivers of the Baltic to freeze solid. Only then could heavy cavalry cross ground that was an impassable bog in summer. For them, the deep freeze was not a problem. It was a weapon. The most famous example is burned into history. In April of 1242, the Teutonic Knights met a Russian army on a frozen lake. It was called the Battle on the Ice, fought on the surface of Lake Peipus. Their commander on the other side was a prince named Alexander Nevsky. Heavy armored knights maneuvering on a sheet of ice in the freezing cold. And then there is the most brutal winter battle of all. The 29th of March, 1461. In the middle of the English Wars of the Roses. The Battle of Towton was fought in a raging snowstorm. A commander named Lord Fauconberg used the howling wind to his advantage. The wind carried his archers' arrows further, while the enemies fell short. By the end, the snow was stained red, and the freezing river nearby was choked with the dead. It is remembered as one of the bloodiest days ever fought on English soil. So how do you even survive the night before a battle like that? The answer was fire and food. A winter camp was built around heat. Soldiers burned fires, and tents were warmed with braziers full of glowing charcoal. It was dangerous, since the fumes from charcoal in a closed tent could kill a sleeping man. For extra warmth, they heated stones in the fire and wrapped them to warm beds and frozen feet. And then they ate. Cold burns through the body's fuel, so winter food was about heavy calories. Thick stews, fatty meat, and endless dark bread. To wash it down, they drank warmed and spiced wine and gallons of ale. They believed the alcohol heated them from the inside. It actually does the opposite, but the warm cup and the calories were real comfort. The last trick was the simplest one of all. Keep moving. Marching and fighting make the body generate its own furnace of heat. A knight in motion was warm, even sweating inside his steel. The deadly moment was standing still, when that sweat turned cold against the skin. This is also why armor needed constant care in winter. Damp and cold meant rust, and a frozen hinge could lock a visor or an elbow shut. So squires worked endlessly, drying the steel and rubbing it with grease and oil. A neglected suit of armor could quite literally freeze a man in place. And through all of it, these were simply hard men. They were raised outdoors, conditioned to the weather, and expected to endure what would break us today. But let's be honest about the price. The cold did not care how brave or how noble you were. Men still froze to death in their camps, far from any enemy. They still lost fingers and toes that turned black with frostbite. The winter killed its share of knights without a single sword ever being drawn. So let's put the real picture back together. Under the steel was wool, and under the wool was a quilted coat of 20 layers. Around the camp were fires, hot stones, fatty stew, and spiced wine. And inside the armor was a man simply refusing to stand still and freeze. We imagine the knight as a hero defined by the gleam of his armor. But in winter, that gleaming steel was trying to kill him just as much as the enemy was. His survival was not magic, and it was not just courage. It was layers of cloth, a roaring fire, and a body pushed to its limit. So the next time you complain about a cold walk to a heated car, remember this. A knight stood in a frozen steel shell in a blizzard, waiting to fight for his life. His armor came off at the end of the day. The winter never once asked his permission.